Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Shadow Man Stories. I can picture some of you already in bed, maybe some of you just getting home from work. Wherever you are, whatever time it is, I'm glad you're here. If this helps you relax or sleep, please like and subscribe. It means a lot. Now, let's get you comfortable, and I'll tell you tonight's story. My name is Jackson Whitmore, and I've been a park ranger for 19 years. I started this job back in 1963, fresh out of the Army, thinking I'd spend my days helping lost hikers and fighting campfires. I never thought I'd be telling a story like this one. I work the backcountry in Great Smoky Mountains National Park, mostly around the Tennessee side. My beat includes Ravens Gulch, a valley so deep and hidden that most folks don't even know it exists. You can only get there by following an old deer trail that winds through ridges over 4,000 feet high. The place has always felt different somehow, but I figured that was just because it was so quiet and cut off from everything. It was October of 1982 when things started getting strange. The first frost had already hit, and thick fog banks rolled through the mountains every morning. Nights dropped down to 28 degrees, cold enough to make your breath steam even during the day. I got the call on a Tuesday morning. Two hikers had come out of the backcountry, telling wild stories about pale children watching them from the tree line near some old settlement ruins. They said the kids were barefoot and wearing old-fashioned clothes, just standing there staring until the hikers looked away for a second. When they looked back, the children were gone. Probably just local kids playing pranks, I told my supervisor. But I knew that didn't make sense. Ravens Gulch was 35 miles from the nearest road, and the radio didn't work there because of all the iron ore in the mountains. No parent in their right mind would let kids wander around out there. Still, I had to check it out. Part of my job was documenting old settlements for the Park Service, and we'd been mapping the ruins in Ravens Gulch for months. If someone was camping there illegally, I needed to know about it. I packed my gear and headed out before dawn on Wednesday. The hike took me 4 hours, winding through thick forest that got darker and quieter the deeper I went. By the time I reached the valley, the sun was high, but the fog still clung to the ground like smoke. The ruins sat in a clearing about half a mile wide, surrounded by trees so thick they blocked out most of the sky. There had been a settlement here in the 1800s, built around a coal mine. According to the old records, 23 families lived here until 1887, when the mine collapsed and trapped most of the men inside. The families just disappeared after that. Some folks said they moved away to find work. Others claimed they died from grief and starvation during that first harsh winter. I'd been to these ruins a dozen times before, but something felt different that morning. As I walked through the clearing, I noticed fresh footprints in the frost around the old cabin foundations. Bare footprints, just like the hikers had described. But that was impossible. It had been below freezing for 3 nights running. The silence bothered me too. Usually the forest was full of sounds, birds calling, squirrels chattering, wind moving through the leaves. But Ravens Gulch was dead quiet that day. Not even the buzz of insects. It was like the whole place was holding its breath. I tried my radio, but got nothing but static. My compass started spinning crazy, and the GPS showed readings that couldn't be right. According to the little screen, I was somehow 500 feet higher than the actual elevation of the valley. I figured it was the iron deposits messing with the electronics, but it still made me nervous. That's when I saw the smoke. It was just a thin line rising from the chimney of the old Henderson cabin, the only building that still had most of its roof. I stopped walking and stared at it, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. The cabin had been empty for almost 100 years. I'd been inside it myself just last month, documenting the layout for our archaeological survey. But there was definitely smoke coming from that chimney. I approached the Henderson cabin slowly, my hand resting on the radio that I knew wouldn't work. The smoke kept rising, steady and thin, like someone was keeping a small fire going for warmth. But that was crazy. Nobody lived out here. Nobody could live out here. The cabin sat at the edge of the clearing, built from logs that had weathered to dark gray over the decades. Most of the chinking between the logs had fallen out, and I could see gaps big enough to stick my fingers through. The front door hung crooked on leather hinges that looked like they'd rot away if you breathed on them too hard. But through the single window, I could see movement inside. I stopped about 20 feet away and called out, "Hello? This is Ranger Whitmore with the Park Service. If someone's in there, you need to come out and talk to me. No answer. But I definitely saw something pale move past the window. I walked up to the door and knocked. The sound echoed strangely, like I was knocking on the side of a deep well instead of a wooden door. I know someone's in there, I said. You're not in trouble, but this is protected land. You can't camp here. Still nothing. I tried the door handle, expecting it to fall off in my hand. Instead, it turned smooth as silk, and the door swung open without a sound. The inside of the cabin made no sense at all. Last month, when I documented this place, it had been empty except for some broken furniture and a pile of old newspapers from the 1940 seconds. Now it looked like a family was living here. There was a wooden table in the center of the room, with 4 chairs around it. A pot hung over the fireplace, and I could smell something cooking, something that smelled like rabbit stew. Clothes hung from pegs on the wall, but they weren't modern clothes. They looked handmade, like something from a museum, and on the table there were 2 bowls of stew, still steaming hot. I walked around the room, touching things to make sure they were real. The clothes felt rough under my fingers, woven from wool that scratched like sandpaper. The wooden spoons in the bowls were carved by hand, with little nicks and scratches that spoke of years of use. But there were no footprints on the dirt floor except mine. This doesn't make sense, I said out loud, just to hear my own voice. I tried my radio again, and this time I got lucky. A burst of static cleared, and I heard Ranger Beth Morrison's voice crackling through. Jackson, that you? You sound far away. Beth, I'm in Raven's Gulch at the old settlement. I need you to do me a favor and look up the mining records for this area. Something weird is going on here. What kind of weird? I looked around the cabin again, at the warm food and the lived-in feeling of the place. The kind that makes me wish I'd brought backup. I can head out there if you want. Won't take me more than a few hours. No, just look up those records first. I want to know more about what happened to the families that lived here. Will do. Be careful, Jackson. The radio went dead again, leaving me alone with the smell of cooking food and the sound of my own heartbeat. I decided to wait outside and see if whoever was living here would come back. I found a spot behind a big oak tree where I could watch the cabin without being seen, and settled in for what I thought would be a long wait. I was wrong. About an hour later, I saw her. A woman in a long gray dress came around the corner of the cabin, carrying a wicker basket. She was pale, not just white but pale like milk, like she'd never seen sunlight in her whole life. Her hair was long and black, pinned up in a style I'd seen in old photographs from my grandmother's time. She walked right up to the cabin like she lived there, opened the door, and went inside. I waited 10 minutes, then followed her. The cabin was empty. The bowls were gone from the table. The pot over the fireplace was cold and black with age. The clothes had vanished from the pegs. It looked exactly like it had when I documented it last month, broken down and abandoned. But I could still smell the stew. I ran outside and circled the cabin, looking for tracks, for any sign of where the woman had gone. I found nothing, not even my own footprints from when I'd walked around the building earlier. It was like none of it had ever happened. That's when I noticed the sun was in the wrong place. When I'd gone into the cabin, it had been straight overhead. Now, it was hanging low in the western sky, painting the valley orange and red. I'd lost 3 hours somehow, and I had no memory of where they'd gone. I spent that night in my sleeping bag about a mile from the settlement, but I didn't get much sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that pale woman in the gray dress. Every sound in the forest made me jump. By morning, I was exhausted and jumpy as a cat. Beth Morrison showed up around 10 o'clock, hiking into the valley with her heavy pack and that serious look she got when something was bothering her. Found those mining records, she said, dropping her pack and pulling out a folder. And Jackson, this place has a darker history than we thought. She spread out photocopies of old documents on a flat rock. The mine collapsed on November 15, 1887. 17 men went down that day and never came back up. But here's the strange part. The families didn't leave right away like we thought. According to these records, they stayed through the winter, trying to dig the men out. I looked at the papers, squinting at the faded handwriting. Says here they finally gave up in March of 1888. That's what the official records say. But I talked to my neighbor, old Henry Watts. His great-grandfather lived in these mountains back then, and he told a different story. Beth sat down on a fallen log and pulled out her water bottle. According to Henry's family, those mining families never left the valley. They just disappeared. One day they were there, the next day they were gone. No packed wagons, no goodbye letters to relatives. They just vanished, along with all their belongings. What does Henry think happened to them? He says his great-grandfather claimed they went hollow. That's what the old mountain folk called it when someone got lost between life and death. They said if you had too much grief and couldn't let go of the dead, you could end up trapped in the places where your loved ones died. I told Beth about what I'd seen in the cabin, the woman in the gray dress, the hot food, the lost time. She listened, without interrupting, but I could see the worry growing in her eyes. "We need to check out that mine," she said when I finished. "If there are people living in these ruins, maybe they're using the old tunnels for shelter." The mine entrance was about half a mile from the cabin ruins, set into the side of a rocky hill. It had been sealed with concrete and steel bars decades ago, but I could see that someone had been digging around the edges. Fresh dirt was piled up near the entrance, and there were those same barefoot tracks in the mud. "Someone's definitely been here," Beth said, examining the tracks. "Look at this." She pointed to something I'd missed. The tracks didn't just lead to the mine entrance. They led into it, disappearing right through the concrete and steel bars like the seal wasn't even there. "That's impossible," I said. "A lot of things about this place seem impossible." We were standing there, staring at the sealed mine, when we heard voices coming from inside. Not shouting or calling for help, just normal conversation, like a family talking over dinner. "Hello?" Beth called out. "Is someone in there? This is the Park Service." The voices stopped. "We're here to help." She tried again. "If you're trapped, we can get you out." A child's voice answered from somewhere deep in the mine. "We ain't trapped, miss. We're just waiting for the mine to reopen so Papa can go back to work." Beth and I looked at each other. The voice sounded strange, too clear for someone speaking from inside a sealed mine, and the accent was old-fashioned, like something from 100 years ago. "How long have you been waiting?" I called out. "Since the cave-in," a woman's voice replied. "Papa's been trying to dig out the other men, but the rocks are heavy. We're hoping someone will come help soon." My blood went cold. The cave-in had happened in 1887. That was 95 years ago. "We need to get them out of there," Beth whispered to me. "Beth, think about what they're saying. They're talking about the cave-in like it just happened. Maybe they're confused. Maybe they've been living in these mountains so long they've lost track of time." But even as she said it, I could tell she didn't believe it. The voices started up again, and this time we could make out individual speakers. A man was talking about shift schedules and coal quotas. A woman was planning what to cook for supper. Children were arguing over a game of marbles. It sounded exactly like a normal family conversation, except it was coming from inside a sealed mine where no one could possibly be living. That's when Beth's radio crackled to life. "All units, we have reports of missing hikers in the Ravens Gulch area. 2 college students were supposed to check in at the ranger station yesterday and never showed up." Beth grabbed her radio. "This is Morrison. Whitmore and I are in the valley now. We haven't seen any hikers. Can you search the area? Their car is still at the trailhead. Copy that. We'll start looking." After she signed off, Beth turned to me with a grim expression. "Jackson, what if those hikers found this place? What if they heard the voices too?" I was thinking the same thing, but I didn't want to say it out loud. What if the college kids had tried to help the people in the mine? What if they'd found a way inside? What if they were still in there? "We're going to have to go in," I said. "How?" "The entrance is sealed solid." I walked around to the side of the hill, looking for another way in. Most old mines had ventilation shafts or secondary entrances. After 20 minutes of searching, I found what I was looking for: a narrow opening hidden behind a tangle of briars, just big enough for a person to squeeze through. "Found it," I called to Beth. She came over and looked at the opening. "That's barely wide enough for a person." "It's wide enough." "Jackson, I don't like this. Something isn't right about this place. 2 kids might be trapped in there, Beth. We have to try." She nodded reluctantly and pulled a flashlight from her pack. "Okay, but we go in together, and we don't split up no matter what." I squeezed through the opening first, with Beth right behind me. The tunnel was narrow and low, carved out of solid rock. Our flashlights cast crazy shadows on the walls, and the air smelled like dirt and something else, something sweet and rotten that made my stomach turn. After about 50 feet, the tunnel opened up into a larger space. I stood up and shined my light around, trying to get my bearings. What I saw made no sense at all. We were standing in someone's living room. The underground chamber was set up like a house from the 1800s. There were wooden chairs around a handmade table, oil lamps burning on shelves carved into the rock walls, and braided rugs on the dirt floor. The ceiling was low but reinforced with timber beams, and I could see doorways leading to other rooms deeper in the mine. "This is impossible," Beth whispered beside me. A woman stepped out of one of the doorways, and I recognized her immediately. It was the pale woman in the gray dress I'd seen at the cabin. Up close, she looked even stranger. Her skin was white as paper, and her eyes were so light they were almost colorless. She moved without making any sound, like she was floating just above the ground. "You're the ranger from outside," she said to me. Her voice sounded far away, like an echo in a deep well. "We've been watching you." "Ma'am, I'm Jackson Whitmore with the Park Service. This is Ranger Morrison. Are you the one who's been living in the old cabin?" She smiled, but it didn't reach those pale eyes. "I'm Mary Henderson. This is my family's home." "Mrs. Henderson, we're looking for 2 college students who went missing in this area. Have you seen them?" "Oh yes, they're here. They came to help dig out my husband and the other men. Such nice young people." She gestured toward one of the doorways, and I heard voices coming from deeper in the mine. Young voices, talking and laughing like they didn't have a care in the world. "Can we see them?" Beth asked. "Of course. They're in the back room with my children." Mary Henderson led us through a maze of rooms and tunnels that shouldn't have existed. Each room was set up like part of a house, a kitchen with a wood stove, bedrooms with quilts on the beds, even a parlor with a rocking chair, and a shelf full of books. But everything looked old, like it had been there for decades. "How long have you been living down here?" I asked. "Since the cave-in," she said matter-of-factly. "We're waiting for the mine company to send help. They said they'd have the tunnel cleared by Christmas, but that was last year. I'm starting to think they forgot about us." Last year, she was talking about Christmas of 1887. We found the college students in what looked like a child's bedroom. They were sitting on the floor playing marbles with 3 pale children who couldn't have been more than 10 years old. When they looked up at us, I could see something was wrong with their eyes. They had the same distant, unfocused look as Mary Henderson. "Hey there," one of the students said. His name was Kevin, according to his college ID. "Are you here to help with the digging too?" "Kevin, what day is it?" Beth asked. He looked confused. "Tuesday, I think." "Why?" "What month?" "November. We've been helping Mr. Henderson and the other men try to clear the tunnel. It's slow work, but we're making progress." Beth and I exchanged glances. Kevin and his friend Sarah had been missing for 3 days, but they thought it was still Tuesday, and they were talking about the mine cave-in like it was a current event. "Sarah," I said to the other student, "your parents are worried about you. You were supposed to check in at the ranger station yesterday." She looked at me like I was speaking a foreign language. "Ranger station? I don't know what you mean. We're just helping these folks dig out their family." That's when I noticed the children playing marbles with them. The kids were pale as their mother, with the same colorless eyes. But when they moved, they seemed to flicker, like images on a bad TV screen. "Mary," I said, turning to the woman in gray, "what year do you think it is?" 1888, of course. March of 1888. We've been waiting all winter for help to come. The truth hit me like a punch to the stomach. Mary Henderson and her family weren't living in the mine. They were dead. They'd been dead for 94 years. But somehow, they were still here, trapped in the moment of their greatest loss, waiting for help that would never come. And somehow, they were trapping other people with them. "Beth," I whispered, "we need to get those kids out of here, now." But when I turned around, Beth was gone. I spun in a circle, looking for her, but the bedroom had no other exits. She'd been standing right beside me, and now she was nowhere to be seen. "Where's my partner?" I demanded. Mary Henderson smiled that cold smile again. "She went to help my husband. He's always looking for strong backs to help with the digging." "Take me to her." "Of course. But you should know, once you go into the deep tunnels, it's hard to find your way back out. The mine has a way of keeping people who are useful." She led me deeper into the tunnels, past rooms I hadn't seen before. We passed a workshop where a pale man in mining clothes was hammering on a piece of metal that rang like a bell. We walked through a storage room filled with pickaxes and shovels that looked brand new despite being 100 years old. Finally, we reached a tunnel that sloped sharply downward. I could hear voices and the sound of digging coming from somewhere ahead. "They're down there," Mary said, "working on the cave-in. But I should warn you, time moves differently in the deep tunnels. People who go down there sometimes forget about the world above." I grabbed her arm, and my hand passed right through her like she was made of mist. "You're not real," I said. "Real is a complicated word," she replied. "We're real enough to be here, real enough to need help, real enough to keep the people who come to help us. You're dead. You died in 1888. Did we? Then how are we talking? How are we still waiting for our men to come home?" I couldn't answer that. I didn't understand what was happening, but I knew I had to get Beth and the college students out of there before they ended up like the Henderson family, trapped forever in a moment that should have ended a century ago. I started down the tunnel toward the sound of digging, leaving Mary Henderson standing in the shadows behind me. The tunnel went down and down, carved through solid rock. The sound of voices got louder as I descended, and I could make out individual speakers. Beth was there, talking to someone about the best way to move heavy rocks. The college students were there too, their voices cheerful and eager. But there were other voices as well. Older voices, speaking with accents from another time. The voices of men who had died in 1887, but somehow kept working, kept digging, kept hoping for rescue that would never come. At the bottom of the tunnel, I found them. The scene at the bottom of the mine was like something from a nightmare. Beth and the two college students were working alongside 17 men in old-fashioned mining clothes, all of them digging at a wall of collapsed rock and timber. The men were pale and thin, with the same colorless eyes as Mary Henderson. Some of them had injuries that should have been fatal, crushed limbs, head wounds, burns from gas explosions. But they kept working, hour after hour, trying to clear a tunnel that had been blocked for 94 years. Beth looked up when she saw me. "Jackson." "Good, we can use another pair of hands. Mr. Henderson says we're almost through to the other side. Beth, we need to leave, now." "We can't leave yet. These men have families waiting for them. We're so close to getting them out." I looked around at the dead miners, all of them working with the desperate energy of men who refused to accept that their time was over. They'd been digging for almost a century, convinced that if they just worked hard enough, they could undo the cave-in that killed them. "Beth, look at me," I said. "What day is it?" She paused, a confused look crossing her face. "It's Tuesday? What year?" "It's..." She looked around at the miners, then back at me. "I don't know. What year is it?" "It's 1982, Beth. These men died in 1887. They're not alive anymore." One of the miners, a tall man with a thick beard who must have been the Henderson family patriarch, turned to face me. "Son, I appreciate your concern, but we've got work to do. My family's waiting for me up there, and I aim to get home to them." "Mr. Henderson, your family is dead. They died waiting for you. They've been waiting for 94 years. He shook his head. "That's impossible. I just saw Mary this morning. She made me breakfast before my shift." "Your family is upstairs in the mine, Mr. Henderson. They're trapped just like you are, caught between life and death, unable to move on." For a moment, his face showed doubt. "That can't be right. Come with me. I'll show you." I led the group of miners back up the tunnel, with Beth and the college students following behind. We climbed past the workshop and the storage room, back to the living areas where Mary Henderson waited with her children. When the miners saw their families, the truth finally hit them. The men had been dead for almost a century, and their wives and children had died waiting for them. They were all trapped in the mine, held there by grief and denial, unable to accept that their lives were over. "Mary," Mr. Henderson whispered, reaching out to touch his wife's face. His hand passed through her like smoke. "What have we done?" "We've been waiting for you, Thomas. We've been waiting so long." "We can't wait anymore," he said, his voice breaking. "We have to let go." But Mary shook her head. I can't leave you down here alone." "You have to. We all have to." I watched as the truth spread through the group of dead miners and their families. One by one, they began to understand that their vigil was over, that they had to release their hold on the world of the living. But they weren't ready to go quietly. "These people came to help us," Mary said, pointing at Beth and the college students. "They can stay. They can keep us company." "No," I said firmly. "They have their own lives to live." The dead families began to argue among themselves. Some wanted to let the living go. Others wanted to keep them, to have companionship in their eternal wait. The argument grew heated, and I realized that if I didn't act soon, Beth and the students would be trapped here forever. "There's another way," I said, raising my voice above the arguing. "You can't move on because the men's bodies were never properly buried. They're still trapped under the rockfall. If we recover the remains and give them a proper burial, maybe you can find peace." "Mister?" Henderson looked at me with hope in his pale eyes. "You'd do that for us?" "I'll do what I can, but you have to let these people go. You have to stop trapping visitors in your grief." The dead miners and their families huddled together, whispering among themselves. Finally, Mr. Henderson stepped forward. "We'll make a deal with you, Ranger. You help us lay our bodies to rest, and we'll release everyone we've kept here. But if you break your promise, if you forget about us—" He didn't finish the threat, but I could see it in his colorless eyes. "I won't forget." He nodded and gestured toward a passage I hadn't seen before. "That tunnel leads back to the surface. Take your people and go. But remember, we'll be watching." I gathered Beth and the college students and led them toward the tunnel. As we walked away from the dead families, I could feel their eyes on us, cold and patient. The tunnel brought us out near the main mine entrance. It was dark outside. Night had fallen while we were underground, though it felt like we'd only been in the mine for a couple of hours. Beth and the students were confused and disoriented. They remembered helping with the digging, but they couldn't explain why they'd thought it was still 1,887. By the time we hiked back to the main trail, they seemed to have returned to normal, though they all complained of strange dreams for weeks afterward. I kept my promise to the Henderson family. It took 6 months of paperwork and bureaucratic fighting, but I finally convinced the Park Service to fund a recovery operation. We brought in specialists with ground-penetrating radar and careful excavation techniques. In the spring of 1983, we found the remains of 17 miners trapped behind the rockfall, exactly where they'd been when the mine collapsed in 1887. We gave them a proper burial in the valley, with headstones marking each man's name and the date he died. Their families' bodies were never found. I think they just faded away when their vigil finally ended. The strange activity in Raven's Gulch stopped after the burial. The pale figures disappeared from the tree line, and the old cabin ruins went back to being empty and quiet. But something changed in me during those months. I started seeing things I'd never noticed before. Glimpses of figures in the forests where old tragedies had occurred, shadows moving in abandoned buildings, faces in the mist around places where people had died with unfinished business. The Appalachian Mountains are full of old sorrows, old losses that never quite healed. And sometimes, when the grief is deep enough and the love is strong enough, the dead find ways to linger in the places where they lost everything. I never talk about what happened in Raven's Gulch. My official report listed it as a geological survey of unstable mine workings. But sometimes, late at night when I'm patrolling the backcountry, I think about the Henderson family and wonder how many other trapped souls are out there, waiting in the darkness for someone to help them find peace. And I listen carefully to every story the hikers tell me, no matter how strange it sounds. Because in these mountains, the impossible happens more often than people want to believe. My name is Marcus Donovan, and I've been a park ranger for 12 years now. Started back in 1969, right after I got home from Vietnam. The jungle taught me how to track, how to read signs most people miss, how to stay alive when something's hunting you. I thought those skills would come in handy, protecting tourists and counting deer. I never expected to use them against something that shouldn't exist. Cherokee National Forest covers a lot of ground in North Carolina, but my beat is the Devil's Kettle Wilderness area. It's called that because of the deep gorge that cuts through the mountains like a giant's knife wound. Natural rock pools catch the runoff, and thick rhododendron bushes grow so dense you can walk through tunnels of green. Beautiful country. Dangerous country, if you don't respect it. March of 1981 started mild, but then the late winter thaw hit hard. Water rushed down from the peaks, turning gentle streams into angry torrents. Flash flood season is always tricky. Hikers get caught off guard, have to be pulled out by helicopter. That's normal ranger work. What happened next wasn't. The calls started coming in from farms around the park boundary. Livestock found dead, but not torn apart like you'd expect from a bear or mountain lion. These animals were drained, completely dry, like someone had opened a valve and let all the blood run out. 2 small puncture wounds in the neck, that's all. No claw marks. No signs of a struggle. First few reports, I figured it had to be dogs. Wild pack maybe, or someone's hunting dogs gone feral. But I've tracked dogs for years, and dog kills are messy. This was surgical. Clean. Wrong. Old Charlie Henderson found his best bull dead in the pasture one morning. 800 pounds of prime beef, and it looked like a raisin left in the sun. Charlie's been raising cattle for 40 years. When I got to his farm, he was white as paper. "Ain't natural, Marcus," he said, pointing at the carcass. "Whatever did this, it ain't from around here." I knelt down next to the bull, pulled out my measuring tape. The puncture wounds were exactly 2 inches apart, perfect circles, like someone had used a compass. The ground around the body was dry as dust, but it had rained the night before. Everything else was mud. Just that one spot, maybe 10 feet around the dead bull, was bone dry. "You hear anything last night?" I asked Charlie. He shook his head. "That's what's got me spooked. Brutus there, he was loud as thunder if a leaf fell wrong. Whatever got him, he never made a sound." I took pictures, measurements, collected some hair samples from the fence. Standard procedure. But my hands were shaking a little as I worked. In Vietnam, you learn to trust your gut when something feels wrong. My gut was screaming. The attacks spread over the next week. 5 more cattle, 3 horses, and a dozen dogs, all the same pattern. Drained dry, 2 puncture wounds, no other marks. The kill sites were always bone dry, even during the heaviest rains we'd had in years. State wildlife officials wanted to blame a mountain lion with rabies, but I'd tracked lions for years. They don't drain blood. They don't leave perfect puncture wounds. And they sure don't make the rain stop falling. I started staying out later, checking the areas where attacks had happened, looking for tracks, scat, broken branches, anything that might tell me what we were dealing with. The forest felt different. Too quiet. Deer trails that had been busy for years were suddenly empty. Birds weren't singing. Even the bugs seemed to be staying away. On the 7th day, I found tracks. They were in the mud beside Devil's Kettle Creek, about 3 miles up from the main trail. At first glance, they looked like mountain lion prints, but mountain lions have 4 toes. These had 6, and they were huge, bigger than my hand, with claw marks that went deep into the wet earth. I made plaster casts, took photos, from every angle. The more I studied them, the more wrong they looked. The claws were too long, too sharp, they curved like fish hooks. And there was something else. A mark behind each paw, like a 5th claw or maybe a spur. That night, it rained again. Heavy, driving rain that should have washed away anything not nailed down. But when I went back the next morning, those tracks were still there. Clear as day, like they'd been carved in stone. That's when I started to think Charlie was right. Whatever was out there, it wasn't from around here. Sue Caldwell joined me on the investigation the following Monday. She'd been with the Forest Service for 8 years, knew the Cherokee side of our territory better than anyone. Her grandmother had been full-blood Cherokee, and Sue grew up hearing the old stories. When I showed her the tracks, her face went pale. "My grandmother had a name for something like this," she said quietly. "Kekle Kudle, the blood drinker." "Come on, Sue, you don't believe in that stuff." She knelt beside the plaster cast, running her finger along the edge of the strange 6th toe. "My people lived in these mountains for 1,000 years before the first white man showed up. You think they made up stories for fun?" I didn't answer. In Vietnam, I'd learned that local knowledge usually beat book learning. If the villagers said don't go into certain parts of the jungle, smart soldiers listened. Maybe it was time to start listening here. We followed the tracks deeper into the gorge. They led through rhododendron thickets so dense we had to crawl, then up a rocky slope where they should have disappeared entirely. But there they were, pressed into solid stone like the rock had been soft clay. "That's impossible," I said. Sue was studying something else, marks on a tree trunk about 8 feet off the ground. Long scratches in the bark, too high for any normal animal. Not impossible, just not natural. The trail led to a clearing I'd never seen before, even though I'd been working this section for years. A circle of dead trees surrounded a small pool of black water. No grass grew in the clearing, no insects buzzed. The air felt heavy, like before a thunderstorm, and in the mud around the pool, dozens of tracks. Different sizes, but all with that same wrong six-toed pattern. "How long has this been going on?" I whispered. Sue was reading marks carved into one of the dead trees. Cherokee symbols, old ones. "According to this, a long time, since the white settlers first broke treaty and built on sacred ground. We set up trail cameras around the clearing, though I wasn't sure they'd work. Electronic equipment had been acting strange in the area. Batteries drained fast. Film got exposed to light somehow. Radio calls turned to static. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every sound outside my cabin made me reach for the rifle. At 3 a.m., I gave up and drove back to the park. Something was pulling me there, like a fish on a line. The trail cameras were destroyed, not broken, destroyed. Torn apart like they'd been hit with a sledgehammer. The film was scattered across the clearing in long black ribbons. But there were no footprints around the cameras. No tire tracks. No sign that anyone had been there at all. I was picking up pieces of plastic when I heard it, a sound like nothing I'd ever heard before. Low and rumbling, but with a musical quality that made my teeth ache. It was coming from the direction of Devil's Kettle Falls. Every instinct told me to leave. Get in the truck, drive back to town, call for backup. But I'd been a soldier before I was a ranger. Soldiers don't run from strange noises in the dark. The sound led me down to the water. The falls were running high from the spring melt, white water crashing down into the deep pool at the bottom. Moonlight turned the spray into silver mist. Beautiful and peaceful, except for the smell. Blood, fresh blood, strong enough to make me gag. I clicked on my flashlight and swept it across the pool. The water was red. Not just tinted red. Deep crimson, like someone had dumped gallons of paint. And floating in the middle of it was something that made my hands shake. A backpack, blue with white stripes. The kind hikers used. I called for rescue at first light. They pulled the body out of the pool 3 hours later. Male, mid-20s, dressed for a day hike. Tourist from Charlotte, according to his ID. David Park, a college student celebrating spring break. The medical examiner said drowning, but I knew better. David Park had the same 2 puncture wounds in his neck as the cattle. Same spacing, same surgical precision, and just like the animals, he'd been drained completely dry. Could have been post-mortem predation, the ME said. Animals feeding after he drowned. But I'd seen the pool that morning. The water was clear by the time rescue arrived. No blood, no sign that anything had died there. Whatever had happened to David Park, it had happened fast and clean, and then all traces had been washed away. That afternoon, I drove to the Cherokee Reservation to talk to Sue's grandmother. Sarah Caldwell was 93 years old and sharp as a knife. She listened to my story without interruption, then was quiet for a long time. "You saw the blood pool," she said finally. "How did you know about that?" "Because it's happened before. Every generation or two, when the balance gets disturbed, when sacred places get violated." She pointed toward the mountains. "That thing you're tracking, it's been sleeping for 30 years, but they woke it up." "Who woke it up?" "The development company. They're planning to build a resort on the old ceremonial grounds. Broke ground last month." She looked at me with eyes that had seen too much. "The Kekle Kudle doesn't like trespassers." The second hiker disappeared 3 days later. Jennifer Walsh, a wildlife photographer from Asheville. Her car was found at the trailhead, camera equipment scattered on the front seat. No sign of struggle, no blood, she'd just vanished. The search lasted 4 days. 50 volunteers, 2 helicopter crews, and 3 bloodhounds. They found her on the 5th day, at the bottom of a cliff that was impossible to reach. The rescue team had to rappel down 100 feet of sheer rock face. Same wounds, same drained condition. But this time, there were claw marks too. Long, deep scratches across her back, like something had grabbed her with hooks. The medical examiner measured them, 1-6 parallel lines, spaced exactly like the toes on those impossible tracks. "We need to close the park," I told my supervisor. Ray Patterson had been running Cherokee National Forest for 15 years. He was practical, methodical, and completely opposed to causing panic. "We have 2 accidental deaths and some livestock predation. That's not enough to shut down 300,000 acres. Ray, whatever's out there, it's not a normal animal." "Then what is it? A vampire?" He laughed, but it sounded forced. "Come on, Marcus, you're a professional. Give me something I can put in a report." I tried to explain about the tracks, the blood pool, the way electronics failed in certain areas. But it all sounded crazy when I said it out loud. How do you write an official report that says you're being hunted by something from Cherokee legend? Sue and I went back to the deep woods. We found more evidence: trees with bark stripped off in spirals, rocks arranged in patterns that had no natural explanation, and always those 6-toed tracks appearing in places they shouldn't be. The creature was getting bolder. Or maybe hungrier. Attack sites moved closer to the main trails. A family camping at the developed campground reported that all the wildlife fled their area after dark. No owls hooting, no bats flying, just dead silence and the feeling of being watched. On the 4th night, I saw it. I was checking the perimeter around Devil's Kettle Falls, looking for more tracks. The moon was dark, and my flashlight beam seemed weaker than usual. The batteries were new, but the light kept flickering. A rhododendron thicket rustled to my left. I turned, expecting to see a deer or maybe a bear. Instead, I saw 2 red eyes staring back at me from about 7 feet off the ground. They weren't reflecting light like normal animal eyes. They were glowing with their own fire, bright enough to see in the darkness. And they were intelligent, not animal intelligence, human intelligence, but old and cold and completely alien. The creature didn't move. We stared at each other across 20 feet of forest floor, and I felt something crawl into my brain. A presence that wasn't mine, sorting through my memories like files in a cabinet. It knew about Vietnam. It knew about the dead hikers. It knew why I was there. Then it spoke. Not out loud. Inside my head, in a voice like grinding stone. "You do not belong here." I tried to raise my rifle, but my arms wouldn't move. The red eyes blinked once, slow as a cat, and suddenly I was alone. No sound of movement, no broken branches. Just the normal forest noises returning, like someone had turned up the volume. I found my voice 2 hours later, sitting in my truck at the trailhead. The engine was running, but I didn't remember driving there. The last thing I clearly remembered was those red eyes and that voice in my head. Sue found me the next morning, still sitting in the parking lot. I told her what happened, and she nodded like it made perfect sense. "It's marking you," she said. "The Kikle Kudle chooses who it wants to deal with. You're the ranger, so you're responsible for the territory. It's giving you a chance to stop what's happening." "Stop what?" "The desecration. The development on sacred ground." She pulled out a newspaper, clipping. "Smoky Mountain Resort Company broke ground on the ceremonial site 2 weeks ago. They're planning a golf course right over the old burial grounds." I read the article twice. The development was massive, a luxury resort with condos, restaurants, and an 18-hole golf course. The land had been sold by the state, despite protests from Cherokee tribal leaders. Construction was already underway. "So we stopped the construction," I said. Sue shook her head. "It's not that simple. The Kekle Kudle has been awakened. It won't go back to sleep until the balance is restored." "What does that mean?" "It means blood for blood. The developers took sacred life from the land. Now the land takes life from them." That night, the killings moved off the mountain. 2 construction workers were found dead at the resort site. Same wounds, same drained condition. But this time, there were witnesses. The night watchman saw something that looked like a giant cat leap the 12-foot fence around the construction site. But cats don't grow to 8 feet long. And they don't have glowing red eyes, and they sure don't vanish into thin air when you shine a spotlight on them. The construction company hired private security, ex-military guys with night vision and automatic weapons. The Kekle Kudle killed 3 of them in one night. Their bodies were found arranged in a triangle around the main equipment shed, each one positioned to point toward the old burial ground. The story hit the national news. Mystery beast terrorizes mountain resort. Scientists came from universities. The FBI sent a team to investigate possible eco-terrorism. Animal control experts arrived with tranquilizer guns and capture equipment. None of them lasted more than a day or two. Electronic equipment failed. Vehicles broke down. People reported nightmares so intense they couldn't sleep. And always, those red eyes watching from the darkness. The creature was no longer hiding. It wanted to be seen. It wanted to be feared. And it was building towards something bigger. The final confrontation came during the new moon in April. I'd been tracking the creature for 3 weeks, learning its patterns. It hunted every third night, always choosing victims connected to the resort construction. But it was also watching me, following me, waiting for something. Sue's grandmother provided the missing piece. The Kekle Kudle wasn't just a predator. It was a guardian spirit bound to protect Cherokee's sacred sites. It could be bargained with, but only by someone willing to take responsibility for the violation. It wants a pact, Sarah explained. Blood for blood, life for life. Someone has to stand for the land and accept the burden. What kind of burden? You become its ally. Its eyes and ears in the modern world. When sacred places are threatened, you protect them. By any means necessary. I understood what she was saying. The creature wanted me to become its human agent. To sabotage development projects, discourage tourists from sacred areas, and enforce the old agreements between the Cherokee and the land itself. What if I refuse? Sarah's eyes were sad but certain. Then it keeps killing until every threat is removed. Could be dozens of people, could be hundreds. The creature led me to its lair the next night. I followed those impossible tracks through the rhododendron tunnels, past the pool of black water, up into caves I'd never seen before. The passage opened into a vast underground chamber, lit by some kind of phosphorescent moss. The walls were covered with bones. Human bones, animal bones, all arranged in careful patterns. Some looked fresh, others were ancient, crumbling with age. At the center of the chamber was a raised stone platform, and on that platform waited the Kekle Kudle. It was bigger than I'd imagined. 8 feet from nose to tail, with a mountain lion's body but wrong in every detail. 6 toes on each paw, with claws like curved daggers, muscles that moved under midnight black fur like snakes beneath velvet, and those eyes, red as fresh blood, filled with intelligence older than human civilization. You came, it said in my mind. The voice was clearer now, more human. Good, we can make a deal. What kind of deal? I stop killing your people. You help me protect the sacred places. Simple trade. I looked around at the bones, trying to count them. Hundreds, maybe thousands. How long have you been here? Since the first Cherokee planted corn in these valleys. I am bound to this land until the mountains fall. The creature stood, and I realized how truly massive it was. But I am tired of killing. Your people breed like rabbits. I kill 10, 20 appear. Better to have one ally than many enemies. Why me? You understand violence. You know the price of protecting something sacred. Images flashed in my mind. Memories from Vietnam, firefights in the jungle, friends who died for hills that were abandoned the next week. And you have no family to threaten, no weakness I can exploit. The creature was right. I'd never married, never had kids. The park was my life, the mountains my only home. If someone had to make this choice, better it be someone with nothing to lose. What exactly would I have to do? Watch, listen. When sacred ground is threatened, you stop it. Sabotage equipment. File false reports. Frighten away investors. The red eyes gleamed. Sometimes more direct action is needed. You mean killing. I mean justice. Your courts don't recognize Cherokee law. Your government breaks treaties like promises to children. Someone must enforce the old agreements. I thought about the construction site, about David Park and Jennifer Walsh, about the farmers who'd lost their livestock. All of it could have been prevented if people had just listened to the Cherokee protests, respected the sacred sites. If I agree the killings stop, the random killings stop. But those who directly violate sacred ground. The creature's lips pulled back, showing fangs like ivory daggers. They still pay the price. I knew I didn't have a choice. Not really. The creature would keep killing until someone accepted its bargain. And maybe just maybe, I could find a way to minimize the bloodshed. I accept. The Kekle Kudla moved faster than thought. One moment it was 10 feet away, the next it was standing over me, one massive paw on my chest. The claws extended, pricked the skin over my heart. Pain shot through my body like lightning, and I felt something fundamental change inside me. When the creature stepped back, I could see in the dark. Not just night vision, Shiem, true sight, like the cave was lit by daylight. I could hear water dripping 3 chambers away. I could smell the age of the bones, the fierce sweat of every human who died in this place. The mark will fade in time, the creature said, but the bond remains. When I call, you answer. When sacred ground is threatened, you act. This is the price of peace. I touched my chest. There was a scar there now, 6 marks like claw wounds, but they didn't hurt. They felt warm, like a reminder of purpose. The construction site will be abandoned. Strange accidents, equipment failures, workers too frightened to continue. You will help ensure this. The creature's eyes dimmed slightly. But remember, this peace is conditional. Betray me, and I hunt again. The Smoky Mountain Resort Company abandoned their project 3 weeks later. A series of accidents had destroyed most of their equipment, and they couldn't keep workers on site. Strange sounds in the night, equipment that ran perfectly during the day but failed after dark, and persistent reports of something large moving through the construction area convinced them to cut their losses. I filed my official report on the mountain lion attacks the following month, recommended that the area be classified as critical habitat for an endangered species. The state bought it, partly because the alternative was too crazy to consider, partly because I'd built up enough credibility over the years to be trusted. The killings stopped. Wildlife returned to the Devil's Kettle area. Hikers reported feeling safe on the trails again. The forest went back to normal, except for the changes in me. I could track anything now. A squirrel's movement through the trees, a snake's trail through dry leaves, the path of a bird through the air. My night vision was perfect. I could smell rain coming from 50 miles away. And sometimes, late at night, I heard the Kekle Kudla calling to me across the mountains. Other supernatural guardians existed, I learned. Ancient spirits bound to protect Native American sacred sites throughout the Appalachians. Most slept peacefully, their territories respected by accident or design. But when developers or tourists pushed too hard into forbidden areas, the guardians woke up. And then, people like me were needed to restore the balance. It's been over 40 years since I made that deal in the cave. I've prevented dozens of developments on sacred ground, sometimes through official channels, sometimes through methods I can't put in any report. The Cherokee Nation considers me an ally now, though they're careful never to acknowledge our arrangement in public. I never married, never had children. The mountains are my family, the forest my responsibility. Every few years, young rangers ask me about the old stories, the legends their grandparents used to tell. I listen politely and tell them to stick to the official explanations. But late at night, when the moon is dark and the forest is quiet, I still walk the trails around Devil's Kettle, still check the sacred sites, still watch for signs that the balance is being disturbed. Because the Kekle Kudla is still there, sleeping in its bone-filled cave, dreaming of the day when the mountains were young and the agreements between man and nature were written in blood rather than paper. And someday, when I'm too old to keep my end of the bargain, it will wake up again. We'll choose a new ally or return to the old ways of tooth and claw. I hope whoever comes after me understands the choice as clearly as I did. Some things are worth protecting, no matter the cost. Some promises should never be broken, even if keeping them changes you into something you never planned to become. The mountains remember everything, and they never forgive. My name is Samuel Blackwood, and I've been watching the weather on Grandfather Mountain for 17 years. Most folks think that's a boring job, but they're wrong. Up here on this 5,946-foot peak in North Carolina, the weather can kill you if you're not careful. I used to be in the Air Force, reading weather patterns for pilots. After my divorce, I needed somewhere quiet to think. The Park Service needed someone who knew about mountain weather, and I needed to get away from everything that reminded me of my failed marriage. My twin daughters, Sarah and Emma, were only 8 when I took this job. They're in college now. The The weather station sits right at the top of Grandfather Mountain, surrounded by exposed rock that looks like an old man's face when the light hits it right. The Cherokee called this place Tanawa, which means Great Hawk. They said a spirit lived here that controlled the weather. I never paid much attention to old stories like that. My job is simple: read the instruments, record the data, and warn people when bad weather is coming. The tourists love our mile-high swinging bridge, but they don't understand how dangerous this mountain can be. The wind up here regularly hits 100 miles per hour. In winter, it's like standing on top of the world with nothing to protect you. January 18th, 1982, started like any other winter day. The forecast called for a big storm, but I'd seen plenty of those. I checked my instruments at dawn. Temperature 15 degrees, wind speed 45 miles per hour and climbing, barometric pressure dropping fast. The storm would hit by afternoon. I radioed down to park headquarters. "This is Samuel at the weather station. Storm's gonna be a big one. You might want to close the bridge today." "Copy that, Samuel," came the reply. "How big are we talking?" I looked at my readings again. The pressure was dropping faster than I'd ever seen. Could be the worst we've had all winter. I'm seeing gusts over 80 already. What I didn't know was that this storm would be different from anything I'd ever experienced. The instruments would start reading things that weren't possible. The wind would begin to speak, and I would learn that some Cherokee stories are more than just old tales told around campfires. By noon, the wind was screaming across the mountain like a living thing. Snow came down so hard I couldn't see 10 feet from the weather station windows. My anemometer, that's the thing that measures wind speed, was spinning so fast the numbers on my readout were just a blur. Then something strange happened. The wind started making sounds that didn't seem natural. Not just the usual howling you hear in storms. These were different, almost like voices. I told myself it was just the wind hitting the rocks in weird ways. Mountain weather can play tricks on your mind, but deep down, something felt wrong. Very wrong. The radio crackled. "Samuel, this is Joe down at maintenance. I'm stuck up here with you. Road's already blocked, and it's getting worse." Joe Littlefeather was a good man, part Cherokee, whose grandfather had lived on this mountain before it became a park. He knew these peaks better than anyone. "How bad is it down there?" I asked. "Worst I've ever seen." Joe's voice came back through the static. "And Samuel? My grandfather used to tell stories about storms like this, stories about when the mountain gets angry." I should have listened more carefully to what Joe was trying to tell me. But I was a man of science, trained to read instruments and trust in facts. I didn't believe in angry mountains or spirits that lived in the wind. That was my first mistake. The storm hit full force around 2 p.m. I've been through hurricanes, blizzards, and tornadoes, but I'd never seen anything like this. The wind wasn't just blowing, it was attacking the weather station like it wanted to tear the building apart piece by piece. My anemometer readings climbed past 120 miles per hour, then 150. At 180 miles per hour, the instrument started making clicking sounds like it was broken. Then the readout showed something impossible, 220 miles per hour. "That can't be right," I said out loud, tapping the gauge. Wind speeds that high would be like standing inside a tornado. The weather station should have been blown off the mountain. But we were still here, and the building wasn't even shaking as much as it should have been. Something was protecting us, or playing with us. Joe knocked on the door, covered in snow and ice. "Let me in before I freeze to death." I opened the door, and the wind tried to rip it from my hands. Joe stumbled inside, his face pale. "Samuel, we need to talk," he said, pulling off his snow-covered coat. "This isn't a normal storm." "What do you mean?" Joe walked to the window and stared out at the swirling snow. "Listen to the wind, really listen." I stopped what I was doing and listened. At first, all I heard was the usual shrieking and howling, but then, underneath it all, I heard something else. It sounded like voices, human voices. "You hear it too," Joe said. "It wasn't a question. It's just the wind hitting the rocks," I said, but my voice didn't sound convincing, even to me. "My grandfather lived on this mountain for 70 years before the government made it a park," Joe said. "He taught me about Tanawa, the great hawk spirit that guards this place. He said when people don't show proper respect, Tanawa gets angry." I wanted to laugh, but the sound of those voices in the wind made me feel cold inside. Joe, I record weather data. I don't record ghost stories. That's when the voices got louder and clearer. They were speaking Cherokee, but somehow I understood what they were saying. They were calling my name. Samuel. Samuel Blackwood. Joe's eyes went wide. You hear your name, don't you? I nodded, unable to speak. The voices were coming from everywhere at once, through the play walls, through the windows, through the floor. The wind was saying my name over and over. Then my instruments went crazy. The temperature gauge showed the outside air dropping to -40, then -60, then the numbers kept falling until they went off the scale. But the strange thing was, the snow wasn't turning to ice. It was still falling as snow, which should have been impossible at those temperatures. Samuel Blackwood. The wind called again, and this time it was so clear it sounded like someone was standing right next to me. I grabbed my radio. Park headquarters, this is Samuel. We have a problem up here. Nothing but static answered me. Try again. Joe said. Park headquarters, emergency at weather station. Do you copy? Still static. The storm was blocking all radio signals, but I'd never lost contact completely before. Joe walked to another window and pointed outside. Samuel, look at this. I joined him and saw something that made my blood freeze. The snow wasn't falling randomly anymore. It was swirling in perfect circles, like tiny tornadoes. And the circles were forming shapes. Letters, Cherokee letters. Tanawa is trying to communicate, Joe whispered. My grandfather said this would happen someday, when too many people came to the mountain without understanding what they were walking on. The wind voices got louder, and now they weren't just saying my name. They were saying words I somehow understood, even though I didn't speak Cherokee. Leave. Respect. Sacred. Guardian. What does it want? I asked Joe. I think, Joe said slowly, it wants you to understand that this mountain isn't just a place where you measure weather. It's alive. And it's been watching you for 17 years. That's when the real terror began. Because if the mountain had been watching me all this time, what did it want? And why was it choosing now to finally speak? The wind outside suddenly stopped. Complete silence. Then, in that silence, we heard footsteps on the roof. Heavy footsteps. Walking in circles around the weather station. But no one could be walking on the roof in a storm like this. No one human, anyway. The footsteps stopped right above where Joe and I were standing. We looked up at the ceiling, holding our breath. Then came 3 loud knocks, like someone was pounding on the roof with a giant fist. Boom, boom, boom. Nobody's up there, I said, but my voice was shaking. Nobody could survive on that roof. Joe was already moving toward his coat. I'm going to check the radio tower. Maybe the storm damaged the antenna. Don't go out there, I said, grabbing his arm. Whatever's making those sounds, Samuel, Joe interrupted, pointing at the window. Look. The swirling snow had formed words again, but this time in English letters big enough to read from inside the station. Get off my mountain. The letters hung in the air for maybe 10 seconds, then dissolved as the wind picked up again. But instead of the chaotic howling from before, the wind now sounded organized, purposeful, like it was being controlled by something intelligent. My weather instruments started going insane. The barometric pressure readings were jumping up and down so fast the needles looked like they were vibrating. The temperature showed 70 degrees, then -30, then 70 again. The wind speed meter spun like a carnival ride. This is impossible, I said, tapping the gauges. These readings don't make sense. They make perfect sense, Joe said quietly, if you understand that normal weather rules don't apply when Tanawa is angry. That's when we heard the screaming. It was coming from outside, somewhere down the mountain. A human voice, crying for help over the wind. I grabbed my radio and tried again. Emergency! Someone's in trouble on the mountain. Static, nothing but static. Joe was already putting his coat back on. We have to help them. We can't go out in this. It's suicide. Samuel, listen to me. If someone dies on this mountain because we didn't try to help, Tanawa will never forgive us. The spirit protects people who respect this place, but it punishes those who ignore their responsibilities. The screaming came again, closer this time, and I realized where it was coming from, the swinging bridge. Some tourist must have been caught on it when the storm hit. I looked out the window toward where the bridge should be, but I couldn't see anything through the snow. The bridge was a quarter-mile from the weather station, connected by a hiking trail that would be deadly in these conditions. "We'll never make it," I said. "We have to try," Joe replied. "And Samuel, I think this is what Tanawa wants, to see if we really care about protecting people on its mountain." As soon as he said that, the wind voices started again. But this time they weren't threatening. They were urgent, like they were trying to tell us something important. "Hurry, bridge, danger, choose." "It's a test," Joe said. "Tanawa is testing us." I made the hardest decision of my life. I put on my winter gear, grabbed a rescue rope, and headed for the door. "If we die out there, I'm blaming you." Joe smiled grimly. "If we die, you can complain to my grandfather's spirit." We stepped out into the storm, and immediately I understood why the wind readings had been so strange. The storm wasn't natural. Instead of random gusts, the wind was moving in patterns, creating paths through the snow. It was like the storm was helping us, showing us where to walk. "Stay close," I yelled over the wind, "and follow the clear spots." We stumbled through snow that should have been waist deep but somehow only came up to our ankles. The wind pushed us forward when we needed to move and blocked us when we started to go the wrong way. It was like having an invisible guide. Halfway to the bridge, Joe grabbed my arm. "Samuel, look at the snow." I looked down and saw Cherokee symbols appearing in the snow at our feet. Each symbol glowed with a faint blue light that lasted just long enough for us to see it before the next one appeared. "It's showing us the way," Joe said. "Tanawa is helping us save whoever's on the bridge." We followed the glowing symbols through the storm until we could see the swinging bridge ahead. What we saw made my heart stop. A young woman was clinging to the middle of the bridge as it swayed back and forth in the wind. But she wasn't just holding on. The bridge was moving in ways that bridges don't move. It was twisting and spinning like the wind was playing with it. And standing at the far end of the bridge, barely visible through the snow, was a shape that didn't look human. It was tall, maybe 8 feet, and seemed to be made of swirling wind and snow. Its eyes were points of bright light, like lightning frozen in place. "Tanaha," Joe whispered. The spirit was looking directly at us, waiting to see what we would do. The woman on the bridge was maybe 25 years old, wearing a bright red winter coat that stood out against the white snow. She was holding on to the bridge cables with both hands, and every few seconds a gust of wind would swing the bridge so violently I thought she was going to be thrown off. But the wind spirit at the far end wasn't trying to hurt her. It was watching us. "This is the test," Joe said. "Tanawa wants to see if we'll risk our lives to save someone on its mountain." I tied the rescue rope around my waist and handed the other end to Joe. "Anchor me. I'm going out there." "Samuel, wait." Joe grabbed my shoulder. "If you go out on that bridge, you'll be completely at Tanawa's mercy. The spirit could decide you're not worthy and let you fall. Then I guess I better be worthy." I stepped onto the bridge and immediately understood how the woman had gotten trapped. The storm hadn't just caught her. The bridge was moving like it was alive. Every step I took, the planks under my feet would shift and sway in ways that had nothing to do with normal wind. "Don't look down," I called to the woman. "I'm coming to get you." "I can't hold on much longer," she yelled back. Her voice was weak with exhaustion and fear. As I moved toward her, the wind spirit moved too, staying at the far end of the bridge. Up close, I could see it more clearly. It wasn't solid like a person. It was made of wind and snow and lightning, constantly shifting and changing shape. But the eyes stayed the same. 2 points of bright light that seemed to look right through me. The spirit spoke, and its voice came from everywhere at once. "Samuel Blackwood, 17 years you have measured my breath, counted my tears, recorded my anger. Never once have you asked permission. Never once have you shown respect." I kept moving toward the woman, fighting to keep my balance as the bridge swayed. I never knew I was supposed to ask. "Your people take from my mountain. They build roads, bring crowds, leave trash, show no reverence for what is sacred. They treat my home like a playground." I was almost close enough to reach the woman now. Her grip was slipping. "What do you want from me?" "I want you to choose," the spirit said. "You can save this woman, but only if you agree to become my guardian. To learn the old ways. To make sure my mountain is protected and respected. And if I refuse, then you both fall." The woman's left hand slipped off the cable. She was holding on with just one hand now, her feet dangling over the 200-foot drop to the rocks below. "I accept," I said without hesitation. As soon as the words left my mouth, the wind changed. Instead of fighting me, it supported me. I reached the woman and grabbed her just as her other hand gave out. "I've got you," I said, wrapping the bull rescue rope around both of us. The spirit spoke again, but its voice was gentler now. "You chose to save a stranger's life over your own safety. You are worthy to be my guardian." Joe pulled us both back to solid ground, and the storm began to calm. The impossible wind speeds dropped to normal levels. The snow stopped falling upward. My weather instruments returned to readings that made sense. But something had changed in me. I could feel the mountain's presence now, like a voice at the edge of my thoughts. I understood that every weather pattern, every storm, every calm day was the mountain's way of speaking. "What happens now?" I asked the spirit. "Now you learn. Joe will teach you the ceremonies, the proper ways to ask permission before bringing people to sacred places. You will continue to measure the weather, but you will also protect what cannot be measured." The woman we'd rescued was unconscious but alive. Joe helped me carry her back to the weather station, where we waited for the rescue team that arrived the next morning when the roads were finally clear. "What do we tell them about what happened?" I asked Joe. "We tell them a tourist got caught in a storm and we rescued her. The rest is between us, the mountain, and Tanoa." That was 40 years ago. I've been the mountain's guardian ever since, conducting Cherokee ceremonies before major tourist events, asking permission from Tanoa before allowing certain activities, and slowly learning to speak with the wind. Most people think I'm just an old weatherman who's been on the mountain too long. They don't know that every forecast I give comes not just from instruments, but from listening to the mountain's spirit. And they don't know that sometimes, when the wind is just right, I can still hear Tanoa calling my name. The official report said, unprecedented atmospheric conditions caused extreme weather phenomena and equipment malfunctions. The Park Service blamed the 10 strange instrument readings on lightning damage. The woman we rescued remembered being caught in a storm, but nothing about wind spirits or floating Cherokee symbols. That was fine with me. Some truths aren't meant for official reports. Joe taught me the ceremonies over the following months. Every full moon, I perform a tobacco offering at the sacred sites on the mountain. Before major tourist seasons, I ask Tanoa's permission to bring visitors to the peak. And when storms are coming, I listen to the wind to understand whether they're natural weather or the mountain's way of expressing displeasure. My daughters visit sometimes. They think I've gotten eccentric in my old age, talking about respecting the mountain and leaving offerings for Cherokee spirits. But they also notice that weather-related accidents have dropped dramatically since 1982. No more tourists caught in unexpected storms. No more bridge closures during dangerous wind conditions. "Dad," Sarah asked me last Christmas, "how do you always know exactly when the weather's going to turn bad?" I looked out at Grandfather Mountain, its rocky face covered with fresh snow. "Experience," I told her. 40 years of listening to what the mountain has to say. What I didn't tell her was that Tanoa still speaks to me, not in the terrifying voice from that storm, but in whispers carried on morning breezes, in the way snow falls on my weather instruments, in the patterns clouds make over the peak. The mountain and I have an understanding now. I protect its sacred spaces, and it shares its secrets with me. Tourism continues, but under strict guidelines I helped establish. Visitors must stay on marked trails. No camping in certain areas. No loud music or disrespectful behavior near the Cherokee ceremonial sites that archaeologists still haven't officially discovered. Most importantly, every person who works on Grandfather Mountain now learns basic Cherokee history and customs. They might not believe in wind spirits, but they understand that this place deserves respect. Sometimes, late at night when I'm alone in the weather station, I'll hear footsteps on the roof again. But they're not threatening anymore. They're more like a friend checking in, making sure I'm still doing my job properly. Joe retired 5 years ago, but his grandson now works maintenance on the mountain. The old knowledge passes down, hidden in plain sight among the regular Park Service duties. People ask me when I'm going to retire. I tell them I'll leave when the mountain tells me it's time. Until then, I'm exactly where I need to be. Yesterday, a new ranger started working here. Young guy, fresh out of college, full of scientific theories about weather patterns and atmospheric pressure. He reminds me of myself 40 years ago. This morning, I heard Tanawa whisper his name in the wind. I think it's time to start teaching another guardian. After all, the mountain has been here for millions of years. It will need protectors long after I'm gone. People who understand that some forces in nature are bigger than anything our instruments can measure. The Cherokee knew this. The mountain spirits are real, and they're watching, always waiting for humans who are wise enough to listen to the wind. My name is Robert Ashford, and I've been a park ranger for 20 years. I'm telling you this because what I'm about to share sounds impossible, but it happened, every word of it. September 1979 was the driest year I'd ever seen in Pisgah National Forest. The creeks had shrunk to trickles, and places that should have been hidden underwater were suddenly exposed. That's how those hikers found it, the Bone Garden, they called it. When their report came across my desk, I figured it was just an old Cherokee burial site. We have plenty of those in western North Carolina. I was wrong about that. I'm 48 now. Used to be a college professor, teaching botany to kids who didn't care much about plants. Then my wife Sarah died cancer, fast and mean, and I couldn't stand being in that house anymore, surrounded by her books and her garden and all the life we'd planned. So I came to the mountains, been mapping remote areas of the forest ever since, documenting rare plants, making sure nobody disturbs the places that should stay wild. The valley where they found the bones wasn't on any modern map. It took me 3 days of hiking through trackless wilderness just to get there. My boots were worn through by the time I pushed through the last wall of rhododendron and saw it. The valley was shaped like a bowl, with steep sides covered in old-growth hemlocks. The trees were huge, some of them probably 400 years old. In the center, where Cove Creek should have been running, there was just damp earth and exposed rocks, and bones. So many bones. They were arranged in patterns. Circles within circles, spirals that reminded me of galaxies, geometric shapes I didn't have names for. All human bones, from what I could tell. Skulls placed at regular intervals. Femurs radiating outward like spokes on a wheel. Ribs curved into shapes that looked almost like words in a language I'd never seen. The first weird thing was how clean they were. These bones should have been brown and crumbling, covered in moss and dirt. Instead, they were white as fresh snow. Not a speck of mud on them, even though they were lying in a dried creek bed. I pulled out my camera and started taking pictures. The valley was hot, even though it was late September and the trees should have been shading it. Indian summer heat that made sweat run down my back. The air felt thick, like breathing through wet cotton. When I developed those pictures later, every single frame came out blank. Just white paper. I spent the first day measuring and documenting everything I could. The bones covered an area about 60 feet across. I counted at least 30 skulls, which meant this was more than just a family plot. Maybe a mass grave from some historical disaster. The Trail of Tears passed through this area in 1838, and thousands of Cherokee died on that march. Could be related to that. But the arrangements bothered me. Burial sites don't look like this. These bones were placed with purpose, with meaning. Someone had spent a long time creating these patterns. As the sun started to set, I noticed something else strange. The plants growing around the bones were wrong. Bloodroot flowers blooming in September, when they should only flower in spring. Ferns growing in spiral patterns, all curving the same direction. And everything was too green, too healthy, considering the drought. I set up my tent at the edge of the valley. The forest was quiet that night, no crickets, no owls, nothing. Just silence so complete it made my ears ring. Around midnight, I heard something moving out in the bone garden. Clicking sounds, like wood tapping against wood. I told myself it was deer, but I didn't sleep much after that. Morning came with thick fog that clung to the valley floor. I heated coffee on my camp stove and tried to shake off the uneasy feeling from the night before. 20 years in the wilderness, and I'd never been spooked by shadows. I wasn't about to start now. But when I walked back to the bone garden, something had changed. The patterns were different. I'd spent hours documenting them yesterday. I knew where every skull had been placed, every arrangement of ribs and vertebrae. Now they'd shifted. Not by much, maybe a few inches here and there, but enough that I could tell. The spiral on the eastern side had tightened. 3 skulls that had been arranged in a triangle were now in a straight line. My hands shook as I pulled out my notebook and compared it to what I was seeing. No mistake. The bones had moved. Wind, I thought. Strong wind overnight could have shifted them. Except there hadn't been any wind. And bones don't just slide around on their own anyway. They're too heavy. I was trying to come up with a rational explanation when I heard branches breaking in the hemlocks. Someone was coming down into the valley. "Hello?" I called out. A woman emerged from the trees. She was maybe 65, 70 years old, with long gray hair and dark skin weathered by sun. She wore a simple dress that looked handmade and no shoes. Her feet were bare and dirty. "You're the ranger," she said, not a question. "Yes, ma'am, Robert Ashford. Are you from one of the nearby towns?" She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "I'm from here. This place. Do you know about these bones? Is this a Cherokee burial site?" "It's a keeping place," she said. She walked past me, right into the middle of the bone garden, stepping carefully between the patterns. For remembering. I followed her, trying not to step on anything. Up close, I could see she was older than I'd first thought. Her hands were gnarled with age, her face lined deep, but she moved like someone young, with easy grace. "These bones have been here a long time," I said. "Do you know where they came from?" "The walk," she said simply. "The long walk, when they made us leave, 1,838. So, many died. The soldiers wouldn't let us stop to bury them proper. So I kept them. I picked the bones clean, arranged them right so they're not forgotten." I felt cold despite the heat. "Ma'am, that was over 140 years ago." She looked at me with eyes that were completely black, no white showing at all. "Yes." I took a step back. "What's your name?" "Don't have one anymore. Lost it on the walk. But you can call me what the others called me, Bone Keeper." She bent down and picked up a skull, cradling it gently. This was Margaret White Dove. She was 7, died of fever near Rattlesnake Springs. Her mother begged the soldiers to let her bury the child, but they said no, couldn't slow the march. So Margaret's body was left in a ditch. The bone keeper placed the skull back down in a new position, adjusting 2 other bones nearby. But I went back, waited for winter when the flesh was gone, brought her here, gave her a proper place. "That's impossible," I said. "You can't be—" "I died too," she interrupted. "On the walk. Should have died anyway, but something held me here. Wouldn't let me go until I finished the work. Until every bone was gathered, every spirit remembered. I wanted to run. Every instinct screamed at me to get out of that valley. But I'm a scientist, and scientists don't run from things they don't understand. They study them. I need to call this in," I said. "This is an important archaeological find. We'll need anthropologists, historians." "No." The word was sharp as a knife. "No one else comes here. This is sacred ground. You can look, Ranger. You can see what I've kept, but no one digs here. No one takes what I've gathered." "Ma'am, I don't think." She moved so fast I didn't see it happen. One moment, she was standing 10 feet away. The next, she was right in front of me, her face inches from mine. "You don't understand yet," she whispered. "But you will. Stay tonight. Watch. See what I do." Then she was gone, vanished into the hemlocks like smoke. I stood there shaking, trying to make sense of what had just happened. An old woman who claimed to be over 140 years old, who moved like a ghost, whose eyes had no white in them at all. I should have left right then, should have hiked back to the ranger station and filed a report about a mentally disturbed person living in the wilderness. But I stayed. God help me, I stayed. I radioed the ranger station that afternoon and told them I needed a few more days to document the site. Then I called Dr. Margaret Stone, an anthropologist I'd worked with before. She'd helped me identify Native American artifacts on previous surveys. "Margaret, I need you to come out to Cove Creek Valley. I found something strange." "How strange?" "Just come see. And bring camping gear. This isn't a day trip." She arrived 2 days later, complaining the whole way about the hike. Margaret was 53, tough as nails, with short white hair and a no-nonsense attitude. She'd spent 30 years digging up old settlements and could identify a bone fragment from 50 yards away. When she saw the bone garden, she went completely silent. "Robert," she finally said, What the hell is this? I was hoping you could tell me. She spent the next hour walking through the patterns, taking measurements, examining individual bones. I watched her face go from confusion to excitement to something that looked like fear. These bones span over a century, she said. Maybe more. Look at this femur, see the processing marks? Someone cleaned this bone with stone tools. But this skull here, these cut marks are from metal. Different time periods, but the same careful treatment. Could it be from the Trail of Tears? Some of them, maybe. But not all. Robert, some of these bones are fresh. My stomach dropped. How fresh? Weeks, maybe days. She pointed to a rib cage on the Deccan, northern edge of the garden. See how the bones still have tissue attached? Whoever this was, they died recently. And someone brought them here and added them to the collection. That night, Margaret and I both stayed up late, comparing notes by lantern light. She'd found evidence of at least 50 individuals in the bone garden, ranging from children to elderly adults. All showed the same meticulous cleaning and arrangement. This is someone's life work, Margaret said. Whoever's doing this, they've been at it for decades, maybe generations. I met her, I said quietly. The person who's doing it. I told Margaret about the bone keeper. How she'd claimed to be from 1838. How she'd moved impossibly fast. The black eyes, Margaret listened without interrupting. When I finished, she was quiet for a long moment. Show me where she went. We followed the path the bone keeper had taken into the hemlocks. The trees were so thick here that almost no light reached the ground. Our lanterns cast strange shadows that seemed to move on their own. We found a cave entrance hidden behind a fallen tree. The opening was narrow, just wide enough for a person to squeeze through. We should wait until morning, I said. Margaret was already pushing through. I've been in worse caves than this. I followed her in, cursing under my breath. The cave opened up quickly into a larger chamber. Our lantern light reflected off smooth stone walls, and I realized we were standing in a natural cathedral carved by ancient water. The ceiling stretched up into darkness, and everywhere covering the floor, arranged along the walls, hanging from ropes suspended from the ceiling, were bones, thousands of them, maybe tens of thousands. All arranged in those same geometric patterns, but more complex here, more intricate. The patterns seemed to shift and flow in the lantern light, like they were alive. My God, Margaret whispered. In the center of the fold chamber was a circle of skulls, at least 100 of them, all facing inward, and inside that circle, sitting cross-legged on the bare stone, was the bone keeper. Her eyes were closed. She wasn't moving. For a moment I thought she might be dead. Then her eyes opened, those terrible black eyes, and she smiled. You came to see, she said. Good, you need to understand. Understand what? Margaret's voice was steady, but I could hear the fear underneath. What I protect, what I preserve. The bone keeper stood, moving through the ring of skulls without disturbing them. Every bone here is a person, a name, a life. The white men wanted us forgotten, wanted our history erased. But I keep the bones, and as long as the bones remain, we remain. You can't have been doing this since 1838, Margaret said. That's impossible. I died in 1838. The bone keeper said. Pneumonia, 5 days after we crossed into Tennessee. But I made a promise to my daughter before I went. Said I'd make sure her bones were kept proper, in the old way. And when I died, that promise held me. Wouldn't let me rest. So I walked back, even though I had no body left to walk with. Found my daughter's bones in a mass grave. Brought them here. Then I found others, and I couldn't stop, can't stop. Not until every scattered bone is gathered. She moved closer to us. In the lantern light, I could see through her. Just for a second, a glimpse of the cave wall behind her, visible through her body. You're a ghost? I said. I'm a keeper, she corrected. Guardian of the dead, and you're going to help me. How? Margaret asked. They're building a road, 5 miles north of here. Going to cut through the valley where Rattlesnake Springs used to be. That's where the biggest mass grave is. 300 bodies, buried shallow. If the road comes through, they'll dig them up, scatter them, pave over them. We can stop the road, I said. Get the site protected. Too late for that. Construction starts in 3 weeks. The bone keeper's voice was sad. I need help gathering the bones before they're destroyed. All 300. That's too much for one person, even one who doesn't need sleep or food. You want us to help you rob a mass grave, Margaret said. I want you to help me save 300 souls from being forgotten forever. The cave was silent, except for the drip of water somewhere in the darkness. If we say no? I asked. The bone keeper looked at me with those endless black eyes. Then you become part of the collection. Margaret disappeared the next morning. I woke up and her tent was empty, her sleeping bag cold. I searched the valley, calling her name until my voice was raw. Nothing. It was like she'd vanished into thin air. I found her notebook by the cave entrance. The last entry was from 2 a.m. Asterisk, going back inside. I need to see more. I need to understand. If something happens, tell Robert I had to know the truth. Asterisk, I squeezed through the cave entrance, my heart hammering. The chamber looked different in daylight, thin shafts of light coming through cracks in the ceiling, illuminating the bone patterns. They were moving, I realized. Slowly shifting and rearranging themselves, like a puzzle solving itself. Margaret! My voice echoed off the stone. She's safe. The bone keeper's voice came from everywhere and nowhere. She's learning. A passage opened up in the back wall, one I hadn't noticed before. I walked through it, down a narrow tunnel that opened into another chamber. Margaret was there, sitting on the floor, surrounded by bones. But she wasn't alone. There were others, dozens of them. People dressed in old-fashioned clothes, with dark skin and black hair. Cherokee people. All of them slightly transparent, like the bone keeper. Ghosts. Robert, Margaret said softly. She looked different. Peaceful. You need to see this. What's happening to you? I'm learning their language, their stories. Every bone here has a story, Robert. Every person has a name. She touched a small skull beside her. This is Joseph Running Water. He was 12 years old, loved to fish, died of starvation outside of Nashville. One of the ghosts spoke, an old man with a weathered face. She has the gift, he said. She can hear us. Most people can't. I backed toward the tunnel. This isn't real. This can't be real. It's real, the bone keeper said, appearing beside me. More real than the world you live in. That world forgets. This one remembers. Let Margaret go. She doesn't want to go. Show him, Margaret. Margaret stood up. She looked at me with eyes that were starting to turn black at the edges. I've spent my whole life digging up the dead, trying to understand them. Now I can talk to them. Really talk to them. Do you know what that means? I can hear their actual voices, not just guess from the artifacts they left behind. Margaret, you're changing. Whatever's happening to you, I'm becoming a keeper, she said simply. Like her. Someone needs to help her with this work. It's too much for one person. And I'm old, Robert. No kids, no family left. What better way to spend eternity than preserving history? No. I grabbed her arm. She felt solid, real, not like a ghost, not yet. You're coming with me. We're leaving now. The bone keeper moved between us. If she leaves, she'll forget everything. The gift will fade. She'll go back to digging up bones without understanding what they mean. That's better than dying. Is it? The bone keeper gestured around the chamber. Every person here chose to stay. They couldn't bear the thought of being forgotten, of their people being forgotten. We're not monsters, Ranger. We're memory keepers. We're the last defense against erasure. I looked at Margaret. Really looked at her. She seemed younger somehow. Lighter, like a weight had been lifted from her shoulders. This is my choice, she said. Not yours. Margaret, but you have a choice too, the bone keeper interrupted. The road is coming. 300 bones will be scattered if someone doesn't gather them first. I can show you where they are. You can work with your ranger friends, get the site protected, maybe stop the construction, or you can walk away and let those people be forgotten forever. Why can't you just stop the construction yourself? If you have all these powers, I'm bound to the bones, she said. Can't go far from them. Can't interact with the living world except in small ways. I need someone who's still alive, still real, to work in that world. Someone who understands what's at stake. I looked around the chamber at all those transparent faces. The Cherokee people who died on the Trail of Tears, whose bones had been scattered and forgotten. The bone keeper, who'd spent a century and a half gathering them, giving them a place to rest. And I thought about Sarah, my wife, buried in a cemetery in Asheville. A proper funeral, a nice headstone, people who remembered her name. She wouldn't be forgotten. These people didn't have that. Without the bone keeper, they'd have nothing. "Show me where the grave is," I said. It took me 3 weeks of careful work with the Park Service and the Cherokee Nation to get Rattlesnake Springs designated as a protected cultural site. The road was rerouted. The mass grave was documented, properly excavated by Cherokee archaeologists, and the bones were reburied in a consecrated cemetery on tribal land. Well, most of them were. I'd spent several nights before the official excavation began, hiking out to Rattlesnake Springs with a lantern and a pack. The bone keeper had shown me where the bones lay, helped me identify which ones were calling to her. We gathered them quietly, skulls and femurs and ribs, and carried them back to Cove Creek Valley. It wasn't all 300, maybe 50. The ones who wanted to stay with her, she said. The ones who were part of her collection, her careful arrangements, her eternal remembering. I never saw Margaret again after that night in the cave. The Park Service listed her as missing, presumed dead in the wilderness. They searched for weeks, but never found a body. I could have told them where she was, but I didn't. Some truths are too strange to speak out loud. I'm retired now, living in a small cabin near the edge of Pisgah National Forest. But I still hike out to Cove Creek Valley once a month. The bone garden has grown. New patterns, new arrangements. The bone keeper is still there, still working. Sometimes I see Margaret with her. Still solid, not quite a ghost yet, but getting closer. She smiles when she sees me. She looks happy. There are other valleys, the bone keeper told me. Other keepers scattered across the Appalachian Mountains. All of them doing the same work, gathering the forgotten dead, preserving the memories that everyone else let slip away. She gave me a map, marked with locations. Places I need to protect, keep secret from developers and road builders and everyone else who'd disturbed them. It's my work now. My purpose. Maybe my penance too. Last week, a young ranger came to me for advice. Said she'd found something strange in the Smokies' bones arranged in circles, moving on their own. I smiled and told her not to worry about it. Just mark it as a protected site and leave it alone. Some things are meant to be kept. Some memories are too important to forget. And some promises, once made, last forever. The drought finally broke last October. Cove Creek is running full again, covering the bone garden with clear water. But I know what's underneath. I know what the bone keeper has preserved. On quiet nights, when the wind moves through the hemlocks, I swear I can hear them, hundreds of voices, singing in Cherokee, songs about home and loss and memory, songs that refuse to be forgotten. I'm the only living person who knows they're there, the only one who can hear them, and I'll keep their secret until it's my turn to join them. My name is David Thornfield, and I've been a ranger at Chattahoochee National Forest for 15 years. I've pulled over 200 people off these mountains, some alive, some not. I know every trail, every cliff, every spot where the wind changes. But what happened on Blood Mountain in November 1982 still keeps me awake at night. People think being a park ranger is all about telling tourists not to feed the bears. That's not even close. When someone gets hurt up here, we're the ones who go get them. No matter how bad the weather, no matter how dangerous the climb. I started this job in 1967, right after I got back from Vietnam. The Army taught me how to patch people up under pressure. The mountains taught me everything else. Blood Mountain is the highest peak in Georgia at 4,458 feet. The Cherokee called it Nevi, place of blood. They say 2 tribes fought a big battle there long ago, and so many warriors died that the ground turned red. I always figured it was just a story. The mountain got its name because of the way the rocks look at sunset, all red and orange like dried blood. The climbing routes up Blood Mountain are no joke. Sheer rock faces, loose stones that'll send you tumbling if you're not careful. When the fog rolls in thick, you can't see your hand in front of your face. The temperature can drop 30 degrees in 20 minutes. I've seen experienced climbers get turned around and lost just 50 feet from the main trail. My wife Sarah always worried when I got called out there. That mountain doesn't like people, she'd say. I'd laugh and tell her mountains don't have feelings. But after what I saw that November, I'm not so sure. The call came in on a Tuesday morning. 3 climbers from Atlanta, all experienced guys with good gear. They were supposed to be back Monday night. When they didn't show up, their families called us. The weather had been weird all week, warm during the day, then dropping to 15 degrees at night. There was talk of a big storm coming. I packed my gear and headed up with 2 other rangers, Linda Hayes and Mike Chen. Linda knew more about Cherokee history than anyone else in the Forest Service. Her grandmother was full Cherokee, and she'd grown up hearing all the old stories. Mike was our tech guy, radios, GPS, all that stuff. If anyone could find these climbers, it was us. The drive to the base of Blood Mountain takes about an hour from the ranger station. As we got closer, I noticed the trees looked wrong somehow. The leaves had already fallen, which was normal for November, but they were all blown to one side of the trail, like a strong wind had pushed them there. The weird thing was, there wasn't any wind that morning. The air was perfectly still. You see that? Linda asked, pointing at the trees. Storm probably blew through, I said, but I didn't believe it myself. We parked at the trailhead and checked our gear. Ropes, first aid kit, emergency shelter, radio equipment, everything looked good. Mike tested the radios, clear signal down to base camp. Linda studied the topographic map one more time, marking the climbing routes the missing team had planned to take. The first part of the hike is easy, a regular dirt trail that winds up through oak and pine trees. We made good time, even carrying the heavy rescue gear. About halfway up, we found their camp, 3 tents, still set up neat and tidy. Sleeping bags were rolled up, cooking gear was clean and put away. It looked like they'd planned to come back. They left yesterday morning, Mike said, checking the cold ashes in their fire pit, heading for the technical routes on the north face. That's when we heard it, a voice, very faint, calling for help. It was coming from up above, near the cliff area. That way, Linda pointed toward a narrow trail that led to the climbing routes. We need to move fast, if someone's been out there all night in this cold. We hiked faster, our boots crunching on the frozen leaves. The temperature was dropping even though the sun was out. My breath started making little clouds. That's when I noticed something else weird. No birds. The forest was completely silent except for our footsteps. 20 minutes later, we found him. One of the climbers, hanging from his rope about 30 feet down a cliff face. He was conscious but barely moving. Hypothermia, for sure. Maybe worse. Hey, I yelled down to him. We're park rangers. We're gonna get you out of there. He looked up at us, and I could see the fear in his eyes. Not just the normal fear of someone who's hurt and scared. Something else, something deeper. The shadows, he whispered, his voice so quiet I almost couldn't hear him. They pushed him. They pushed Tom right off the edge. I looked at Linda and Mike. Okay, probably some shock talking, I said. Let's get him warmed up first, then we'll find out what really happened. But even as I said it, I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the weather. The way he'd said, shadows, like he wasn't talking about regular shadows from trees and rocks. Like he meant something else entirely. Something that could push people off cliffs. Getting the survivor off that cliff took us 2 hours. His name was Jim Crawford, a teacher from Atlanta who'd been climbing for 10 years. He knew what he was doing, which made his story even more troubling. While Mike and I worked the ropes, Linda stayed with Jim, trying to keep him talking and awake. She wrapped him in emergency blankets and gave him hot coffee from her thermos. Slowly, he started making more sense. But what he told us didn't make sense at all. We started the climb around 8 in the morning, Jim said, his teeth still chattering. Perfect conditions. Tom was leading. He's climbed this route before. Dave was in the middle. I was bringing up the rear. What happened? Linda asked gently. Jim stared at the cliff, face like he was seeing it all over again. About halfway up, the temperature just dropped. Dropped fast. Went from maybe 40 degrees to freezing in just a few minutes. Then the fog rolled in. I looked up at the sky, clear blue, not a cloud anywhere. Fog? Thick as soup. Couldn't see Tom anymore, even though he was only 20 feet above me. That's when we heard the voices. What kind of voices? Like people talking, but not in English. Sounded old somehow, ancient. Then Tom started yelling. Jim's hands were shaking as he took another sip of coffee. He said something was up there with him, something moving in the fog. At first we thought maybe another climbing team, But then he screamed. What did he scream? He said, "It's pushing me. Something's pushing me." Then we heard him fall. The rope went tight, then slack. When the fog cleared, Jim's voice broke. When the fog cleared, Tom was gone. Just gone. And Dave was hanging there unconscious. "Where's Dave now?" Mike asked. "Dead." Fell trying to reach where Tom disappeared. I watched it happen. Jim looked at each of us. This thing, this shadow, it formed up right next to Dave. Looked like a person, but dark. Completely dark. It reached out and touched his rope. The rope just came apart, like it had been cut with a knife. I've heard a lot of crazy stories from people in shock, people who've been hurt and scared. Hypothermia can make you see things that aren't there. But Jim wasn't talking like someone who was confused. He was talking like someone who'd seen something impossible and was trying to make us believe it. "Jim," I said carefully, "you've been out here all night in the cold. Sometimes when people get really cold, they can see things. I know what I saw." His voice was steady now, and his eyes were clear. Those weren't hallucinations. Those were something else. Something that lives up here. Linda had gone very quiet. She was staring up at the cliff face with a strange expression on her face. "Linda?" I asked. "What is it?" "My grandmother used to tell stories," she said slowly, "about shadow warriors, Cherokee spirits that guard sacred places. She said they could touch the world of the living when they needed to protect what was theirs." "Come on, Linda. You don't believe." "I believe Jim saw something." She looked at me seriously. "The question is what we're going to do about it. We needed to recover the bodies. That was our job. But as I looked up at those cliffs, I felt something I'd never felt before in 15 years of mountain rescue. I felt like we were being watched." The radio crackled. Mike answered it. "Ranger Chen here." "Mike, this is base camp. We're getting some weird weather reports. Big storm system moving in fast. You guys need to get off that mountain by 4 o'clock. Mike checked his watch. "That gives us 3 hours. "We can do it," I said. "Quick recovery, then we're out of here." But as I started unpacking my climbing gear, I noticed something that made my skin crawl. My headlamp, which had been working fine all morning, was flickering. Not like a dying battery, more like something was interfering with it. Linda's headlamp was doing the same thing. So was Mike's. "Equipment malfunction," Mike said, tapping his light. I looked around at the cliff face, at the trees, at the patches of shadow between the rocks. For just a second, I could have sworn I saw one of those shadows move. Not the way shadows move when clouds pass over the sun. This shadow moved on its own, like it was alive. "Let's get this done fast," I said. I should have trusted my instincts. I should have called for backup, or come back another day, or listened to the part of my brain that was screaming at me to get off that mountain right now. Instead, I clipped into my rope and started climbing toward where the bodies had fallen. That was the first mistake of many I made that day. By the time I was 30 feet up the cliff face, I could feel the temperature dropping again. My breath was coming out in thick white clouds. Ice was starting to form on the rock, making the hold slippery and dangerous. That's when I heard the voice behind me, speaking words I didn't understand, in a language that sounded like it came from another time. I looked down at Linda and Mike. "Did you guys say something?" They both shook their heads. They were looking up at me with worried expressions. "David," Linda called up, "maybe you should come down. Something doesn't feel right." I was about to agree with her when I saw the shadow. It was standing on a ledge about 10 feet to my right, human-shaped, but completely black, like someone had cut a person-shaped hole in the world. It wasn't moving, just standing there, watching me. I blinked hard, thinking my eyes were playing tricks on me. When I opened them, the shadow was gone, but I could still feel it watching me. I found Tom's body on a ledge about 60 feet up. He was broken pretty badly from the fall, but what scared me was his face. His eyes were wide open, and his expression was pure terror. Like he'd seen something horrible right before he died. Dave's body was hanging from his rope in a small canyon between 2 rock walls. Getting to him meant rappelling down into a narrow space where the sun never reached. The temperature down there was at least 20 degrees colder than up on the main cliff. "This doesn't make sense," Mike said over the radio. "It's November in Georgia. It shouldn't be this cold." He was right. My thermometer read 8 degrees. In the middle of the day, with the sun shining, as I worked to secure Dave's body, I started hearing things. Footsteps on rock above me. Voices speaking in that same ancient language Jim had described. Sometimes I'd catch movement in my peripheral vision. But when I'd turn to look, nothing was there. "Linda," I radioed down. "You getting any of this? The voices?" "Yeah. Mike's hearing them too." "Any idea what they're saying?" There was a long pause. "It's old, Cherokee. Very old. I can only catch a few words. Something about trespassers. About sacred ground." I was strapping Dave's body into the rescue harness when it happened. A shadow fell across me, even though there was nothing above to cast it. I looked up and saw a man standing on the opposite wall of the canyon. Except it wasn't really a man. It was the shape of a man, cut out of darkness, tall, broad shoulders, wearing what looked like old-style Native American clothing. But instead of fabric, everything was made of shadow. He was looking right at me. "Linda," I whispered into my radio, "are you seeing this?" "Seeing what?" I pointed up at the shadow figure. "That. David, there's nothing there." But there was. He was still watching me, and now he was raising his arm, pointing at me. The temperature dropped another 10 degrees. Ice started forming on my rope. "Get out," a voice said. Not over the radio. The voice came from right next to my ear, even though I was hanging alone in the canyon. "Get out now." The ice on my rope was spreading fast. In another minute or two, the rope would be too slick to climb. I clipped Dave's body to the line and started hauling him up as fast as I could. That's when the shadow warrior stepped off the cliff and began walking down the rock wall toward me. Walking straight down like gravity didn't apply to him. I've never climbed so fast in my life. When I reached the top, Linda and Mike were standing there with expressions I'd never seen before. Behind them, arranged along the cliff edge, were a dozen more shadow figures. "Now do you see them?" I asked. "We see them," Mike said quietly. The shadow warriors were all different heights and builds, but they all wore the same ancient Cherokee clothing. Feathers, leather, war paint that looked black instead of the usual colors. They stood perfectly still, watching us. "My grandmother was right," Linda whispered. "They're the ones who died defending this mountain. They never left." One of the shadows stepped forward. This one was taller than the others, with what looked like a feathered headdress. When he spoke, his voice seemed to come from everywhere at once. "This place is sacred," he said in perfect English. "You bring death seekers to walk on the bones of warriors." "We're just trying to help people," I said. My voice was shaking, but I tried to keep it steady. "These men fell. We're taking them home to their families. They fell because they climbed where they should not climb. The mountain rejected them." "Look," I said, "I don't know what you are or what you want, but we have a job to do." The warrior chief moved closer. I could feel cold radiating from him like he was made of ice. "Your job," he said, "is to keep the living away from the dead. You have failed." That's when I realized what was happening. These weren't just random ghost stories. The Cherokee shadow warriors weren't trying to hurt climbers for no reason. They were protecting something. "This whole area," I said slowly. "It's a burial ground, isn't it?" The chief nodded. 300 warriors sleep in the stone. Every path your death seekers take crosses our sacred places. Every spike they drive into rock pierces the resting place of the dead." I looked at Linda. "The climbing routes, they all go right through ancient Cherokee territory." "We tried to warn," the chief continued. "Cold wind, failing equipment, voices in the fog. But still they come. Still they disturb the peace of warriors. What do you want us to do? Close the paths, keep the living away, or we will be forced to defend our dead as we defended them in life." More shadow warriors were appearing now. They seemed to rise up out of the rock itself until the entire cliff face was lined with them. Dozens of ancient Cherokee fighters, standing guard over their eternal battlefield. "And if we don't?" I asked. The chief gestured toward Tom and Dave's bodies. "Then more will join the dead, and more, until you learn to respect the sacred places." "We respect. You make paths for strangers to walk on graves. You call it rescue when spirits call it invasion." The temperature was still dropping. My watch said it was now 5 degrees below zero. Our rescue equipment was starting to fail from the cold. Ice was forming on our climbing harnesses. We'll need time, I said, to close the routes officially, to convince people. Time is what the dead have, the chief said. But the living are running out. As he spoke, the fog Jim had described started rolling in. Thick gray mist that seemed to come from nowhere, rising up from the rocks like breath from the earth. In the fog, I could see more shapes moving. Not just the warriors, but horses, weapons, and what looked like an entire Cherokee war party from centuries ago. 3 days, the chief said. If the Death Seekers return before the paths are closed, we will claim them for the mountain. This is our final warning. The fog swirled thicker, and one by one, the shadow warriors began to fade back into the rock. The chief was the last to go. Tell the story true, Ranger, he said, or become part of it. Then he was gone, and we were alone on the cliff with 2 dead bodies and a mountain that had just declared war on anyone who tried to climb it. We got Tom and Dave's bodies down the mountain in record time. None of us spoke much during the hike back to the trailhead. What do you say after something like that? How do you explain to people that an entire mountain is haunted by Cherokee warriors who are perfectly willing to kill modern climbers to protect their ancient burial ground? Back at the ranger station, I filed the most carefully worded report of my career. Equipment failure due to extreme cold. Climbing conditions unsafe due to unstable weather patterns. All technically true, but missing the real story. The problem was, Jim Crawford wasn't going to stay quiet. He'd already called his insurance company and the local newspaper. He was telling everyone who'd listen about shadow people pushing his friends off cliffs. We have to do something, Linda said. We were sitting in my office, trying to figure out our next move. If more climbers go up there. I know. I'd been thinking the same thing. But how do we close Blood Mountain? What reason do we give? Endangered species protection? Mike suggested. Geological instability. There's got to be something. Linda shook her head. Those take months to process. The chief said 3 days. She was right. In 3 days, there'd probably be a dozen new climbers on Blood Mountain. Word was already getting out about the mysterious deaths, and people were getting curious. Nothing draws thrill seekers like a good mystery. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about the Shadow Chief's words. Tell the story true, or become part of it. What did that mean exactly? Around midnight, I got dressed and drove back to Blood Mountain. I needed to try talking to them again, see if there was some other way to work this out. The mountain was different at night, colder, quieter, but also more alive somehow. As I hiked up the trail with just my flashlight, I could feel eyes watching me from the trees. Not animal eyes, something else. I made it to the climbing area around 2 a.m. The shadow warriors were waiting for me. You came back, the chief said. He was standing on the same ledge where I'd first seen him, but now he looked more solid, more real. I wanted to talk, I said, about finding another way. There is no other way. The dead must be protected. What if we made it official? What if we turned this whole area into a memorial, a place to honor the Cherokee warriors who died here? The chief was quiet for a long moment. Around him, other shadow warriors began to appear out of the rocks. You would do this? Honor enemies of your people? They're not enemies. They were defending their home. Any soldier can respect that. The chief stepped down from the ledge and walked toward me. Up close, I could see details I'd missed before. War paint, scars, eyes that held centuries of anger and sorrow. What kind of memorial? A proper one. With your real names, your real story. No climbing routes, no tourist trails. Just a sacred place where people come to remember and respect what happened here. And the Death Seekers? We'll redirect them to other mountains. Make it clear that Blood Mountain is off limits. The chief looked back at his warriors. They seemed to be communicating somehow, without words. There would be conditions, he said finally. Name them. The ceremony must be done right. By Cherokee people, in the old way. The mountain must be blessed and protected according to our laws. Done, and you, he pointed at me, must be the keeper. You must make sure the sacred places stay sacred. I thought about what that meant. 15 years of my life were tied up in these mountains. My job, my home, my family. For how long? Until your death, Ranger. This is the price of peace. Before I could answer, I heard something that made my blood freeze. Voices, coming up the trail. Human voices. Hello? Anyone up there? We saw your flashlight. 3 college kids with backpacks and climbing gear were hiking toward us. They'd probably seen my truck at the trailhead and decided to investigate. The shadow warriors heard them too. They began moving, flowing across the rocks like smoke. "Chief, wait," I said. "Let me handle this. They are trespassers. They come to disturb the dead. They don't know. Give me a chance to turn them back." The voices were getting closer. I could see their flashlight beams bouncing off the trees. "Hurry," the chief said, "before my warriors lose patience." I ran down the trail toward the approaching climbers. 3 kids, probably around 20 years old, all excited about some kind of night climb adventure. "Hey," I called out, "Park Ranger, this area's closed." "Closed?" One of them, a girl with blonde hair, looked disappointed. "We drove all the way from Athens. We heard about the climbing routes up here." "Yeah, sorry. Dangerous conditions, rock fall, unstable weather. You need to head back down." "Come on," said one of the boys. "We've got good gear. We know what we're doing." Behind me, I could feel the temperature dropping. The shadow warriors were getting impatient. "Look," I said urgently. "I'm not kidding around here. People have died on this mountain in the last few days. Real deaths. You need to leave. Now." The seriousness in my voice must have gotten through to them. They looked at each other, then back at me. "Okay," the girl said. "But can you tell us about some other good climbing spots? We really wanted to do some technical routes." I walked them back down the trail, recommending other mountains, other climbing areas. Safe places where ancient warriors weren't standing guard over burial grounds. When I got back to the cliff area, the chief was waiting alone. "You kept your word," he said. "You turned them away. So we have a deal?" The chief nodded. "The memorial will be built. The mountain will be protected. And you will be its keeper." "What about the other rangers? My family?" "I can't exactly tell them the truth about this. Tell them what they need to know. That this place is sacred. That it must be protected. The details are less important than the protection." As he spoke, the other shadow warriors began to fade back into the mountain. The chief was the last to go. "We will be watching, Ranger. We will know if the sacred places are truly safe. And if they are, then the mountain will be peaceful again, and the dead will rest." He started to fade, but I called out one more question. "Chief, what was the real name of this place? Before it was called Blood Mountain?" His voice seemed to come from the rocks themselves. "Nehai Asgaya, place where warriors sleep. Remember that name when you build the memorial." Then he was gone, and I was alone on the mountain with a promise I had to keep. That was 40 years ago. I kept my promise. It took 2 years to get the paperwork through, but we got Blood Mountain redesignated as a Cherokee sacred site and memorial. Linda worked with tribal elders to design a proper ceremony to honor the warriors who died there. We held it on a cold November morning, exactly 3 years after I first met the Shadow Chief. The climbing routes were officially closed for cultural preservation and geological safety. We built a memorial trail that leads to a viewing area where people can see the mountain and read about the Cherokee warriors who Gover class and never who cultural preservation fought and died defending their homeland. The memorial lists their real names, their real story. I retired from active ranger duty 5 years ago, but I still live in the same house at the base of the mountain. My official title now is Cultural Preservation Specialist, which basically means I'm the guy who makes sure tourists don't wander off the memorial trail and into the sacred areas. Most days, the mountain is peaceful. Families come to visit the memorial, school groups learn about Cherokee history, and everyone goes home safely. The shadow warriors keep their word. As long as people respect the sacred places, they don't interfere. But sometimes, usually around November when the first cold snap hits, I still see them. Standing on the cliffs, watching, making sure I'm doing my job right. Jim Crawford kept telling his story for years. Eventually, most people decided he'd been suffering from hypothermia and hallucinations. A few believed him, but they usually just added it to the collection of ghost stories that surround every mountain in Appalachia. I never told anyone the complete truth. Not even Sarah, though she knew something had changed in me after that rescue mission. She noticed I'd become more careful about which areas of the mountain I'd let people visit, more respectful of the Cherokee history of the place. Linda understood, of course. Her grandmother had been right about the Shadow Warriors all along. Linda helped me research the real history of Blood Mountain, the actual names of the warriors who died there, the true story of what happened during those ancient battles. We made sure all of that was included in the memorial. The hardest part of being the keeper isn't dealing with the spirits. They're honorable beings who keep their word. The hard part is dealing with the living people who don't want to respect sacred places. Every year, I catch a few thrill seekers trying to sneak past the barriers and climb the restricted routes. Most of them turn back when I explain about the cultural significance of the area. A few get stubborn about it. Those are the ones I worry about, because the Shadow Warriors are still there, still protecting their burial ground, and they're still perfectly willing to defend the mountain if they have to. I'm 68 years old now. My son Michael has been talking about taking over as the mountain's cultural preservation specialist when I retire. He grew up hearing stories about Cherokee history and the importance of respecting sacred places. He doesn't know about the Shadow Warriors, but he understands that some places are too important to disturb. Sometimes I wonder what will happen when I'm gone. Will the Shadow Warriors trust someone new to be the keeper? Will they honor the deal we made with the next generation? I think they will. The Cherokee have always been people of their word. Last week, I was up at the memorial area doing my regular maintenance check when I saw the chief again. He was standing on the same ledge where we'd first met, looking out over the valley. "The mountain is peaceful," I told him. "Yes," he said. "The dead rest well. My time as keeper is almost over." He nodded. "We know. Your son has the right heart for this work. You'll give him a chance? If he agrees to take over? If he honors the sacred places as you have honored them, we will work with him as we have worked with you." I felt a weight lift off my shoulders that I'd been carrying for 4 decades. "Thank you," I said. But when I looked back to the ledge, the chief was gone. The sun was setting behind Blood Mountain, turning the rocks red and orange like they were on fire. Like ancient blood in the stone, remembering old battles and old promises. I walked back down the memorial trail, past the plaques that tell the real story of Nefiasgaya, the place where warriors sleep. Past the names of Cherokee fighters who died defending their home 300 years ago and who still stand guard today. Most people who visit the memorial think it's just history. Old stories about old times. They don't realize that some battles never really end, and some warriors never really stop fighting. But I know the truth. And as long as people remember and respect what happened on this mountain, the Shadow Warriors will keep their peace. The mountain remembers, and the dead are patient. That's all that matters.